These are the days of Elijah, declaring the word of the Lord. And these are the days of your servant Moses, righteousness being restored. And though these are days of great trials, of famine and darkness and sore, still we are the voice in the desert, crying, prepare ye the way of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, so lift your voice. It's a year of jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. These are the days of Ezekiel, the dry bones becoming as flesh. And these are the days of your servant David, rebuilding a temple of praise. And these are the days of the harvest, the fields are as white in your world. And we are the laborers in your vineyard, declaring the word of the Lord. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, so lift your voice. It's a year of jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. Behold, he comes, riding on the clouds, shining like the sun. At the trumpet call, so lift your voice. It's a year of jubilee, and out of Zion till salvation comes. Who was and who is to come? Who was and who is to come? Who was and who is to come? Who was and who is to come.
Well, good evening. I'm glad you're back here on a Wednesday night. If you weren't here last week, then you might not know what you're about to see, which is a buddy of mine, Dr. Jim Martin, who's at the Harding Graduate School up in Memphis. And he's just a mentor, a friend, confidant, teacher of mine. And he's just a wonderful man. But we talked last week about encouragement. This week we're going to talk about encouragement in marriage. And some of you might think, well, wait, I've been married 50 years. I don't need to see this. Or, oh, I've got kids. They don't need to hear this. I'm hoping this is a jumping off place for a conversation that you can have about what makes a good spouse. Maybe you can talk to your kiddos about relationships, even dating relationships, who to look to and who to use as an example, a good model of those. And always, the metaphor of marriage is used throughout Scripture to talk about our relationship with Jesus. And so I think there's applications to be had here beyond, this is not 10 ways to make your marriage better. This is maybe 10 ways just to be better. And Jim and I will kind of break down a little bit of watching other people, of mimicking them, modeling our lives after them, and getting good advice and seeking good advice from good sources. So when we're all said and done here, it's about an 18-minute watch, but at the end of it, I'd love for you to discuss with your kiddos what makes a good marriage. Who do you know? Who do you see that you think, boy, they've got a great relationship? And maybe you'll use this as a place to talk about how we can be brides of Christ. I hope this is a blessing to you. It's a blessing to me. I miss you, and I can't wait to see you again on Sunday. God bless.
We were in Kansas City, Missouri, where I preached 3 years, right before Waco. And, I felt very inadequate as a husband and as a father. The church wasn't going well. I felt very inadequate there. And so as my anxiety kicked in, I would just work harder. If it's not going well, just do more and try harder. And what I wasn't doing is I wasn't being attentive to Charlotte at all. I was a nice guy, she would say, but I wasn't being attentive. I wasn't paying attention to her. And she's pretty low maintenance, which actually made it worse because she wasn't demanding much at all. And, we had to get some help for that. And it was very, it was humbling for me because I didn't know what to do. But I'll tell you, what I learned for us getting unstuck was not as complicated as I feared. Your fears will always take you to deep, dark places where I learned that what my wife needed was attention and to be valued. And I had a lot of growing up to do. There may be a few that can relate to that.
That happens.
But, it was really important to me to do that especially we had small children, and I began to realize this is who they're going to see as in their father. And so, it took a while and a lot of start and stop and success and fail. But I began to learn. I think she would tell you if she was here that she would also tell you that she had to learn a lot. But what I realized was, as I was more attentive, it encouraged her a lot.
I want to talk. We talked last week about people who encourage us, our Barnabases.
Okay.
For Rhonda and I can think about 3 specific times in our marriage. One, even before we were married, where a professor of mine at ACU pulled us aside very lovingly, put her arms around us and said, "Look, you guys need to be in premarital counseling." Well, we weren't engaged. And she said, "I'm just telling you, you need to go." And we met Dr. Mark Lewis there at ACU, and it was a wonderful 13 weeks of counseling, and it was deep and it was rich. It was such a blessing. And fast forward 5 or 6 years, and we were struggling early in our marriage, and an elder and his wife had us over for pie. And I'll never forget eating pie at their dining room table and listening to them tell us about the early times of their marriage and how hard it was. But there was some freedom in that. There was a load that was lifted, that a burden that I didn't need to be carrying around to think that I needed to get it all right. Just some permission from some very important people to say this is difficult, and it does get better. It's not one of the lies I was say this to a lot of people, but I was saying this just a few weeks ago, that one of the lies that Satan uses in the middle of our anxiety, in the middle of our depression, in the middle of our anger is this: it's always going to be this way. It's never going to get better.
Right.
And to push back against that truth and to say things do get better. This is only for a season, and not in a trite way of saying, "Oh, well, I'm sure this will pass." None of those people just thought, "Well, that's normal. Everybody goes through this. Let's let them figure it out." They had the gumption, the guts to walk into a situation and say, "We want to encourage you." Did you have that? Have you had some folks along the way, especially when it comes to marriage, that have poured in, who maybe even butted in and said some good things to you?
Yeah. I had one that was, anyway, let me do the calmer one. I think Bob and Laura McGilvery, they're in Waco. Their kids went to ACU. He was a former elder. I think just calm people.
Yeah.
And occasionally we would talk to them about rearing children. I watched the way they treated one another. And occasionally they would just say things about marriage, and I paid attention to every word. But that's who comes to mind.
Well, and you do, if you're aware enough, if you can kind of get your head up
Yeah.
and see. I can remember families that I was the youth minister. We only youth ministered while we didn't have kids, which is strange because we did it for 15 years. But in that time, we watched people who just had extraordinary kids. And we would say things like, "Oh, you should write a book," or we would take notes, or "How do you do this?" And there's a wealth there. There's a wealth of experience. There's a wealth of knowledge to say, "Okay, that's who I want to be like." I often say that there's three people everyone needs in their life. They need someone that's further down the road that they can that will mentor them, that will pour into them. There's fellow travelers. They're the folks they're doing pre-K while you're doing pre-K, and they're running to soccer practice, and they understand the pressure cooker of the job and all of that stuff. You need those shoulder to shoulder folks. And then I do think that there's a great benefit to having somebody to pour into, to then say, I want to encourage you. And I love that biblically we can see that. Maybe one of the greatest examples of that is that First Timothy passage where Paul is saying, remember the faith that was in your grandmother, that was in your mother, that you received by the laying on of hands, that when you made this confession in front of witnesses, and you can kind of see the whole community there, and you see Paul pouring into Timothy, Timothy pouring into the church at Ephesus. And so can you talk a bit about how useful it is to have those people in your life? What is it that you need to say, or maybe not need to say? Give us some wisdom there, as a guy who I'm sure had to at times wade into situations that you didn't want to. What's the best way to encourage a couple in their marriage? How do you do that?
Well, that's a good question. Sometimes you don't know. There are times when I've sat down with a guy over coffee or lunch, and I will say something like this. And this isn't a total stranger. This is somebody I know. I will say, let me run something by you, and I want to see if this is even remotely accurate. And I'll just say something like, about the last 2 months, I haven't seen you smile. In fact, the other day when I was preaching, you looked like you were in another world. And I'm sensing there's something not right now. And I guess I'm wondering, are things okay? Or at the house, or I'll name his wife, with you guys? Or am I just missing this? And if the relationship is there, what a person will often say is, well, it's just been rough the last few months. And they might talk, and then I will listen, and then I'll usually follow up some way with that person. There's not a lot of things I do well, Jeff, but I'm an expert at keeping confidences.
Yeah.
And people in Waco learned, you tell me something, and it's a safe place. And it's a real treasure for people when they know that it can tell you something and it doesn't go any farther.
Well, and by approaching it in that way, you've opened a door. You've said, if I'm way off here, and maybe you're not off, but they're just not ready to talk about it, then no harm, no foul. But you've opened up this space for them to be vulnerable.
Yeah.
And there's great power in that. There was a couple things I wanted to say about that. One is, as a minister, people often approach Rhonda and will say, "Well, I'm sure you know what's going on with me because I've shared that with Jeff and he's been praying with me." And she literally will look at them with a blank stare and go, "I don't know because he hasn't told me." And you're right. To know that someone has a safe place to be broken, a safe place to confide, is good. And then I want to talk a little bit about competency and really. Okay, I'll give you this example. There was a stigma, and there has been a stigma for a long time, of any kind of mental health help. When we seek a psychological help or emotional health, there comes with that a stigma. We don't talk about it; it's stayed in the shadows. I mean, I don't mean to be blunt, but in my family growing up, you had to be crazy to go to counseling, and
Yeah.
I would say now you'd be crazy not to go. But there was some people that came along and said, "Hey, even if your marriage is like, say, a B plus, you're just really rocking along. Here are some things that you can do." And Jim, you're a great blog guy, and here's where I want to land tonight. Or what are some of those pieces that you can point people to go, you ought to just try this. I'm going to give you one example while you think. It was long before we had kids, but we had a couple that they had established a date night very early in their marriage, and they kept it. It was protected. It was time, and that they just would never let anything else encroach on. And we said, that looks like a great idea. And we applied that to our marriage kind of differently, where I gave Rhonda Tuesday nights. And this was when we had little baby Jackson. And he would scream for an hour every night. Well, she would leave just about the time he was screaming off to go read a book at Starbucks. And we've kept it now for 10 years. Tuesday nights are still Rhonda's night. But little ideas like that. I'm in a hurry a bit here because I don't want to talk too long. But even somebody saying to me, "I've got a name of a great counselor. Would you like to talk to them?" Huge blessing in our life that we weren't in crisis at the time that we engaged in that. But it really came at a time and a season in our marriage that we needed it. What are some of those things, Jim? 5 things you can do. What are some important things that you might guard and create in your marriage that'll really bless it?
Well, so a lot of people, there are some people in crisis, and to go to a godly counselor and competent counselor, if you're in crisis, that's one thing.
Right.
Where a whole lot of us is we just get stuck.
Yeah.
We're bored to death, or we keep doing the same stupid thing and getting the same stupid results, and we don't know how to get off that treadmill. But I mean, sometimes it's just something as simple as, for a spouse to ask. I'm thinking right now for a husband, especially, to ask a wife, "What would be helpful to you today for me to do?"
Right.
What would be helpful for you?
Yeah.
To ask something like that. The other thing I have done is I try to pay attention to people that are doing things right.
Yep.
Now, I'm not talking about having perfect kids and all that. I'm just talking about just somebody who just seems to be a godly person who seems to have a pretty good marriage.
Yeah.
And so through the years, I've asked people, could we have lunch or coffee? And I'd like to ask you a few questions about, what's it like to be married in your 40s or 30s, whatever it is? What you wish you had done differently. Yes. But just to ask people those questions. See, what we do sometimes, it gets us in trouble, is we act like we know what we're doing. I'm over. I am 66. Okay, I'll be 67 next month. I've never done this before.
Right.
I'm not in a recliner. I'm at work, but I've never done this. And so what I've been doing is I'll ask a few people, how do you stay alive and
Yeah.
full of fire well into this time of life? It doesn't matter if you're 40 or 60 or whatever, but just to ask people who are a little bit ahead of you, how are you doing that? How are you being married for that long? I just find that helpful, just to ask people.
Yeah. Somebody here would make a statement that you get fewer of those people to ask when you get to be your age, but I'm not the kind of person to make that statement, Jim. I'm not going to do it.
You didn't make that
I
statement.
would not do it. Brother, this has been great. I always enjoy just talking with you. When my text goes off and it's from Jim, that's a good day. But I just appreciate you and your friendship and the way you've poured into me and to my ministry. And so God bless you, and y'all take care. I should end this with a question for everybody there at home. What does it take to be a good spouse? And even if you've got young kids, this is a great question to ask them. What makes a good mommy? What makes a good daddy? And I'd love to hear the answers that you're going to get. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. You can come back anytime, and we'll through the magic of Zoom. We'd love to have you back. But God bless y'all.
Thank you very much.
Yes, take care.